Good morning everyone, good afternoon and good evening. Today is Wednesday, we are into a new reset in retail, but nobody cares, because what's important for today is the new set of balance tuning that is happening in the beta. So it's been a while since we checked one of these balance tuning and buffs and nerfs changes for the classes and specs, but today we have a big one. We have quite a massive set of changes, and unfortunately, I'm sorry I have to spoil this, but the majority of these changes are going to be nerfs. There are going to be some cool buffs, to be fair, but of course what is going to take the spotlight is going to be the severe nerfs that some specs are going to be hit by. So let's start with the tinier things, okay? Let's begin at the edges of the changes, at the more laid-back changes, starting with Demon Hunter. The main target for today is going to be Havoc and not Vengeance, which is surprising. If I had to guess, I was thinking about some perhaps less damage to Vengeance, particularly in AoE, but for today it's only Havoc that gets targeted. So one is a nerf to Chaos Strike and Annihilation, so your main single target damaging ability is nerfed by 5%, which is not that major. Then you have First Blood. Your extra bleed attached to your blade dance goes from 85% of attack power to 75% of attack power, which is also somewhat laid back. The bigger of the nerfs comes to your inner demon talent, which was your empowerment of your next Chaos Strike as soon as you enter demon form to splash AoE around all targets. That gets nerfed by 25%. Overall, this is actually the smallest of the nerfs you will see for today. It's not even that big compared to the rest, because starting with the rest being Hunter. So both Marksmanship and Beast Mastery are nerfed. Now, the nerf to Marksmanship is in no way outstanding in the beta, and also in no way even average in the beta. Is quite in a bad state, even just from the talent perspective, not even about the power itself, the way the talents work out. It's not a very well made out spec, despite the fact that its talent tree has been reworked about 74 times. The main change for Marksmanship for today is that aim shot, so pretty much your entire reason for being as a Marksmanship hunter, gets nerfed by 15% damage. And that's just about the only change you're getting for today. Take it and leave. Then we have Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery also gets one nerf. If we want to be technical, they're getting two nerfs. One nerf is that your War Order talent, the talent which gave you a very juicy, guaranteed reset of your kill command cooldown whenever you used Barb Shot, is now only 25 or 50% at rank 2. So it's no longer guaranteed, it's no longer a guaranteed proc. This is not too relevant in AoE. Yes, you do have the talent Kill Cleave, which is going to make your kill command AoE, so it's going to be very important in AoE situations for Beast Mastery to use kill command as much as possible, because now it's a legitimate AoE button as well. But you have other ways out to spam kill command. You can, for example, take Killer Cobra and basically just become a Fire Mage, a 1-2-1-2-1-2 spec where you go Cobra Shot, kill command, Cobra Shot, kill command over and over. So it's not nearly as bad in AoE, it's worse in single target. It's a 10 to 15% damage nerf in single target, which was one of Beast Mastery's strengths, at the very least from the testing in the beta. After the first two classes, Demon Hunter and Hunter, we jump to the last of the classes, which is Warlock. Warlock also gets some minor-ish changes, in particular to Affliction and to Destruction. The Affliction nerfs are more aimed at PvP, more so than PvE, so, nobody's gonna care. The Vile Taint now is going to apply the curse only for 6 seconds, the 50% slow curse. Instead of 12, your Sakrolash's Dark Strike is now going to extend the duration of the curses for less. So this is purely, mostly, from a PvP perspective. There is also a very minor buff to Destruction, where Rolling Havoc and Madness of the Ajakir become slightly longer, last for slightly longer, 5 seconds instead of 4, and 6 seconds instead of 5. The main change for Warlock, so we break a little bit away from more nerfs that we have just seen, is a set of buffs for Demonology. That is a pretty large set of numbers for Demonology across the board. It's not that one thing in particular, it's not a targeted set of buffs, it's more or less the majority of your spec. Here is the comprehensive list of everything that gets buffed in the demonology tree for your talents. Implosion damage is increased by 25%, Bile Scourge Bomber's damage is increased by 20%, Hand of Gul'dan is increased by 35%, Guillotine's Fell Explosion damage is increased by 25%, Grimoire Felguard damage is increased by 20%, so it's a whole set of pretty large, pretty benevolent changes for demo, and that's because demonology is not doing too well in the beta. I hope we're not gonna end up in the same issue of Shadowlands where Blizzard is going to balance demonology, only to then forget that they needed to balance demonology as if they had power infusion on them, because that's exactly what happened in Shadowlands and we saw how powerful demonology can get. So I hope you're not gonna enter that same issue in Dragonflight. Then the last class to get minor to average to middling changes is going to be Rogue. We have now pointed out in the last couple of weeks that because Blizzard nerfed the aura modifier, so the base modifier to all of the damage of the class and the spec, to Rogue was changed significantly. Assassination lost 34% damage to everything. Subtlety 17% less damage, Outlaw 14% less damage. So since then Blizzard went on to buff tiny things more and more to the different specs of Rogue to try to bring them back more evenly, individual ability by individual ability. So today as well we have further adjustments, this time for Assassination again and for Subtlety. So quite a few of their abilities are getting increased in the 5% range. So you have things like Ambush, like Rapture, like Garrote, like Mutilate, but then also for Subtlety you have Backstab, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike. Basically most of your major rotational abilities are all getting buffed for these two specs of Rogue. Now, being done with Rogue, we are stopping the average changes, okay? The road is closed. From here on out, we only get significant changes, large changes to the specs we're going to go over. So let's start with Monk, okay? That's gonna be one of the first in lines for massive changes. The Monk changes are exclusively, this time around, for Windwalker. Windwalker's just a bunch of nerfs. Across the board, 20-ish% less damage across the board to Windwalker. You might have seen in one of the last few videos, like for example the don't get baited by the numbers of the beta, exactly the fact that Windwalker was one of the most damaging, one of the strongest DPS specs in the beta by quite a large margin, and this nerf is expected. As a matter of fact, since many players are going to just see this negatively because it's a nerf, even worse, the ones who are only in retail and not playing in the beta are going to see this as a very bad thing. Let me tell you right now, very simply, this nerf isn't even enough. Windwalker is still the strongest DPS spec, or one of the strongest DPS specs after this nerf. Okay, that is how out of line the damage of Windwalker Monk was in the beta. So it's not a bad thing whatsoever. You're still a very strong spec and you're still one of the strongest specs. It's just that before this change, you were comically overpowered. Okay, that's not where you want to be. Even if you're playing the spec yourself, that's not good for the game, for anyone in the game. So it's good that many of these things of Windwalker are getting nerfed. It's a bit confusing though, because basically everything of Monk was nerfed with the exception of Strike of the Windlord, which was one of the major culprits of the burst damage of Windwalker, especially in single target. And, you know, it has very large numbers. Look at the AP modifier of this ability. It's like 540%, which is a massive number. I'm just surprised it hasn't gotten changed yet, this ability, which seemed quite problematic, but for the rest of the spec, they did deserve to receive this large amount of nerfs. Now, if we talk Windwalker, then we also have to talk the other spec that gets nerfed. Because just like we talked about in the Don't Get Baited by Numbers video, or by our overall look at the DPS specs of a couple of weeks ago, I told you, yeah, you shouldn't look at the numbers in the beta, because if you did, then I would just tell you, roll a Windwalker Monk or roll an Enhancement Shaman, because they are the two specs doing the most out-of-line damage right now in the beta. So what happens a few days later? Enhancement damage has been nerfed by 25% across the board. So here is the comprehensive talent list of what's got nerfed for enhancement. The answer is fucking everything. That is what Enhancement is getting for today. Now, look at this. So I show you the damage that Enhancement was doing. So you're like, well, you know, this doesn't look that bad, right? You said Beast Mastery was doing quite well in single target and now has just gotten nerfed by 10% in single target. Windwalker was also doing way too well, so now they also got nerfed as well. But Enhancement, you know, is it really worth to get nerfed by 25% more damage when they do this much? Look at the active time, you blind goofs. That is a Enhancement Shaman who has been dead for a fourth of the fight. Literally on the ground, spectating the encounter, which is Terros, by the way, the new patchwork, target dummy, stationary, single target fight. And he is doing that much damage. Playing 1/4 of the fight less, playing 27% of the fight less, and now gets nerfed by 25% in damage. So basically, what you see here is the post-nerf version of Enhancement. An Enhancement that did 25% less damage because he was dead for 25% of the time. And that's how much damage he's doing. And the only 2 specs above him are the other 2 specs that just got nerfed. That is how strong Enhancement was in the beta. You might have also seen from my videos as well. You might have seen that as I was chilling playing Elemental Shaman, I had to basically be extremely careful to pull more than 2 mobs. And even when I pulled 2 mobs, I would nearly die. I was basically role-playing as a vanilla player when I was playing Elemental in Dragonflight Beta. And then I switched to Enhancement, and it was just smooth sailing. I would just be pulling 3 to 4 mobs at the same time, mow them all down. There were some world quests with some elite mobs with 3 or 4 adds next to them. Just pull them all, pop your cooldown, mow them down. So it was definitely over the line. I'm surprised one of the more over the line things for Enhancement was Elemental Blast, which now gets nerfed alongside everything else, which means Lava Burst is also getting weaker by 25%, Lightning Bolt is also getting weaker by 25%, so they will still be much weaker than Elemental Blast. That's one of the main weirdness I found for Enhancement. I thought maybe targeting a few abilities more differently than just 25% across the board would have been better, like nerfing Elemental Blast, nerfing Primordial Wave, and nerfing Doom Winds more than the rest of the kit. I don't think abilities like Crash Lightning, abilities like Frost Shock, abilities like Lava Lash, or even Flame Shock deserved to be nerfed by 25%. So I think it's gonna be subject to some more tweaking, this large set of nerfs for Enhancement, but definitely in terms of values, in terms of bringing down the spec is necessary. It was necessary because it was definitely overperforming. Now, next to Enhancement, we actually get the spec that gets buffed of Shaman, which is Elemental. In a very similar tone, most of the things get changed for Elemental. It's a 10% more damage across the board to basically every ability, with the exception of Lava Burst, which gets buffed by 18% damage. Now, this might sound a little bit depressing, but it's just not nearly enough. In particular, Lava Burst is still hitting like a wet noodle. Even with this 18% damage buff, it won't do anything. And 2, Earthquake is still a travesty. If you haven't followed the development of Elemental Shaman, Earthquake was nerfed by 60%. 60% damage to the ability that you use to do roughly 70% of all of your AoE damage. So if 70% of all of your damage is nerfed by 60%, this totals out to be roughly a 40% nerf to all of your damage, which is ridiculous. 40% damage nerf. When Earthquake was nerfed, Blizzard promised to Elemental some compensation buffs, which didn't come for ages. Now they have come, and now they are shit. They don't really change anything, in particular in AoE. You're still basically unviable. If I want to be very optimistic, you are at the moment as Elemental unviable in Mythic Plus. You're not going to be even remotely close to being a meta spec in Mythic Plus because your AoE damage is pathetic. Your single target damage could be very good, in particular thanks to all of these buffs to single target abilities. Unfortunately, your right side of the tree, which is your fire damage based side of the tree, which is better for single target, is still too weak because of your fire spells, namely Lava Burst, and your fire cooldown, namely Ascendance, are still too weak. That is the main issue at the moment for Elemental, which is a shame, of course, because the talent itself and the options you are offered and the new cool things you are offered in the talent tree are still great. It's just a tuning problem at the moment. The numbers are just too small for Elemental. Now we finish with the last class. At this point, you should have watched enough of these balance tuning videos for the beta of Dragonflight to know which one is the last class. We can't have a balance tuning video without a wall of text about Priest. You should know this by now. It is a tradition of Blizzard. So, the wall of text starts positively. Okay, let's start with the good things, which is Shadow Priest. You know, it couldn't really go lower than this for Shadow. So at the very least, Shadow Priest gets buffed across the board by 10% more damage. This is the opposite problem of Elemental. The problem of Elemental is the numbers, while the talent tree is quite good, while the problem of Shadow is more akin to the talent tree itself having problems. So it's good that they are getting buffed by 10%, but you would rather see other type of changes for Shadow Priest rather than this. You have the pretty much opposite change for Holy Priest. While Shadow gets buffed by 10% in damage, Holy Priest gets nerfed by 5% in healing in the majority of its abilities. You have some nerfs to the general side of Priest, the general tree of Priest. This one is going to be very PvP focused when it comes to crystalline reflection. So the reflected damage you do when you absorb damage has been nerfed by like 40%. Again, it's mostly a change for PvP. What is not mostly a change for PvP, even though it's gonna affect it greatly, is the nerf to mind games. You know, just in time to praise a couple of videos ago, to praise the single target damage of Discipline and Holy being the strongest single target damage out of all healers. Now you get one of your single target spells nerfed, but you should still be, by the way, you should still be doing the most damage still out of all healers. But of course, this one is going to hurt Discipline more because they also use mind games for their atonement damage rotation. However, the nerfs actually come way more hurtful when it comes to Discipline. Discipline has a few changes you can kind of like skip because they're not the focus of the day. Like Light's Wrath damage is increased by 25% more, but it gains less damage per target affected. So it's better in Mythic Plus because you don't have that many targets to hit, so the base damage being increased is good, and it's worse in raids because you could have hit way more targets with your atonement, right? So then you have the actual hurtful changes. So Power Word Radiance is healing for 30% more, but Power Word Radiance applies atonement at a 50% duration instead of a 60% duration. This is bad because the sole purpose, the sole reason why you cast Radiance is to spread atonement. You don't give a shit about the healing of Radiance. It's terrible. It has nothing to do with Discipline, right? As a Discipline Priest, you heal with atonement. Radiance doesn't even work with your Mastery. Your Mastery works on targets affected by Atonement, and Radiance is casted to apply atonements to players. So it doesn't even function on your Mastery. It's terrible. So the healing increase of Radiance is worthless, and as a negative, to get this to do more healing is less duration of your Atonement, which is really what you care about. This nerf still pales in comparison to the actual nerf Discipline is receiving, because Evangelism goes from a 90-second cooldown to a 180-second cooldown, in short, from 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes cooldown. This is the expansion, by the way, where Spirit Shell is going away. Spirit Shell made a return in Shadowlands and then got cut immediately in Dragonflight. So now, as a Discipline Priest, what you have left for your rotation as a big cooldown was just Evangelism. You have Barrier still. That's still there, but in terms of your playstyle, it was just Evangelism. That's the only thing you had to play around, and now it's gonna happen every 3 minutes. So it's going to significantly change, and by change I mean increase by 50%, the time you have to wait for your ramp windows, right? The time where you have your big Discipline cooldown. This is going to make it much harder, much less explainable and much less justifiable to have a priest in the raid, for example, because of the weakness now that they have in their cooldowns, only basically one cooldown every 3 minutes. That is very, very powerful. It might be a pretty significant set of nerfs. Of course, when you look at it from the outside perspective, it doesn't even look that bad. You have a 3-minute Evangelism and a 3-minute Barrier. a Resto Shaman has a 3-minute Spirit Link and a 3-minute Healing Tide Totem. So isn't that the same thing? Aren't they very close to cooldowns? What about Holy Paladin? Holy Paladin has a 3-minute Aura Mastery, and that's it. Druids don't even have that. They have a Tranquility only as a major cooldown, so isn't Discipline still doing just fine with cooldowns? Well, technically yes, but practically no, because that was the real powerful thing about Discipline. Very powerful burst cooldown in terms of healing. And if you nerf it by this much, it's gonna make it much less likely, because also one of the bigger issues of Discipline is that their healing outside of their cooldowns was also very, very weak. It's not like Resto Druid, who technically doesn't even care about their cooldowns. They're still healing for a lot outside of their cooldowns, or even like Holy Priest and Resto Shaman, who don't really care too much about their cooldowns. They will continue to heal for a lot even outside of their cooldowns. It was Discipline who was very, very reliant on their cooldowns for their effective healing. So this nerf is hurting them way more than if you nerfed some other specs cooldowns. If you nerfed Resto Druid's Tranquility by 1 minute, if you nerfed a Paladin's Aura Mastery by 1 minute, it wouldn't nearly be as bad as nerfing Evangelism for Discipline. So yes, on the plus side, if you want to see the glass half full, this nerf is effectively near irrelevant in Mythic Plus. Okay, great. Good job, you still have a chance of being viable in Mythic Plus, despite the fact that you have the lowest damage out of all healers, so you won't be viable in Mythic Plus, but at the very least you're not getting nerfed for today in Mythic Plus. Actually, you still are, because Mind Games got nerfed, so never mind, forget what I said. Not a very good state of Discipline at the moment, both their damage still being a problem and now their major rate cooldown getting gutted, significantly nerfed. So we close in not too good of a note for today. Mostly nerfs, very few buffs. The few buffs were good, to be fair, because Elemental, Demonology, and Shadow Priest were specs that needed buffs. So at the very least it's good that it is getting acknowledged, and then the specs getting nerfed were also specs that needed to get nerfed. Enhancement and Windwalker in particular, when it came to damage, and for healing, Holy Priest was also necessary. Pretty surprising that just Holy Priest gets nerfed, considering that Holy Priest was still, while being strong, still weaker than Resto Druid and still weaker than Windwalker Monk. So I wonder if we're going to be seeing shortly a few more changes for these other specs that escaped the nerf bat for today. But for now, these were all the changes on this new beta build and for the balance tuning that will follow. Of course, as I leave you, I'm gonna start first by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for being a big contributor in what allows me to continue to provide you all with raw content. You can, of course, if you're worried about making it to the end of the month, you can support in other ways other than spending money, which include liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. They are pretty simple ways to support without costing you anything other than perhaps a handful of mouse clicks, which is, I believe, acceptable. And lastly, for more social interactions and general parasocial relationships with your imaginary friends, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right over at whatever it was, these two links right here. Thank you guys again for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, it's over. It's over. I told you October, I gave you until the end of the month to start being cold, and you're still at 21 degrees at 7 PM. It's November. That's not acceptable.